2 winters ago, I almost started a war over snow. Not kidding. What started as a couple dirty snow piles behind my garage somehow ended with a grocery store cutting me a $45,000 check, ripping out half their parking layout, and a grown man named Dennis calling me at 7 in the morning sounding like he was about to cry. And honestly, if they had just stopped after the first time I asked nicely, none of it would have happened. I live in a small town outside of Cedar Glen, Pennsylvania. One of those places where everybody waves at each other even if they secretly hate each other. Where people still leave old couches on their porch for 6 months and call it temporary. My house backs up to a regional grocery chain called Freshway Market, not a huge Walmart-type place. More like one of those local chains people pretend to love because they sponsor Little League teams and donate canned food around Thanksgiving. When I bought the house, my realtor actually pitched a store behind me like it was a feature. "You'll never be far from groceries," she said. Real cute until you realize grocery stores also come with delivery trucks at 5 in the morning, shopping carts rattling in the wind, and snowplows that sound like tanks scraping through the apocalypse. Still, for years, it was manageable. Then came that winter. The first snowstorm hit in early December. Nothing crazy, maybe 8 inches. And the next morning, I noticed a mound of plowed snow sitting behind my detached garage near the back fence. I remember standing there in my boots with a coffee mug thinking, that's new. Didn't bother me much. Snow melts. That's the thing about being a homeowner after 40, Duck. You learn to pick your battles. You stop caring about stupid little annoyances because there's always another one coming right behind it. Loose gutter, cracked siding, furnace making a weird noise at 2 in the morning. So I looked at the snow pile and figured maybe they hired a new plow guy who didn't know where the property line was. No big deal. Then another storm rolled through the week before Christmas. This time the pile was bigger and dirtier. You could actually see the layers in it, gray slush packed with gravel, road salt, coffee cups, straw wrappers, cigarette butts, somebody's entire gas station breakfast frozen into a little mountain behind my yard. That annoyed me? Not enough to complain, but enough to notice. A few days later, the weather warmed up, and when the pile melted, it left these long, ugly burn marks across the grass near my fence. If you own property, you know the feeling. It's not really about the grass. It's the disrespect of it. Somebody else making a mess and assuming you'll live with it because it's easier for them. Then January hit, and that's when it stopped feeling accidental. Every snowfall after that followed the exact same pattern. Their plows would clear the whole Freshway parking lot, push everything toward the back corner, and dump the final load straight against my fence line like my yard was some kind of overflow zone they were entitled to use. The piles got taller every week, 3 feet, then 5. Then high enough that I could barely see the back tires of the shopping carts through the snowbank. One morning, I walked outside and found an entire broken taillight lens frozen inside the pile like a bug trapped in amber, red plastic sticking out of dirty ice. I just stood there staring at it while my neighbor Walter laughed from across the fence and said, "Hell, at this point they're building you a second garage." Walter was retired, 70-something, former mechanic, the kind of guy who always smelled faintly like gasoline and peppermint gum. He'd lived in the neighborhood longer than anybody, and when I mentioned maybe calling the store, he shrugged and said, "Corporate people don't care unless it costs them money." At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Turns out Walter was a prophet. By mid-January, my fence had started leaning. Not dramatically, just enough that you noticed it when the light hit sideways. The snow pressure kept pushing against the panels until the posts shifted slightly in the ground. Every time I looked out my kitchen window, it irritated me a little more. So finally, I called the store. The manager introduced himself as Dennis, younger guy, probably mid-30s. Sounded exhausted before I even started talking, like he'd already dealt with 6 angry customers and a broken freezer that morning. I explained the issue calmly. The snow, the fence, the garbage mixed into the piles. He gave me the standard customer service voice. "I'm really sorry about that, sir. I'll talk to the plow contractor and make sure they're aware." Fair enough. I thanked him, thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Next storm came 3 days later. Another pile, bigger than before. This one pressed so hard against the fence, I could literally hear the wood creaking when the wind blew. That's when I got mad. Not explosive mad. Worse, quiet mad. The kind where you stop reacting emotionally and start paying attention. I called Dennis again. This time he sounded annoyed the second he picked up. Before I even finished explaining, he sighed and said, "Look, snow has to go somewhere. Okay, we're limited on space back here." I remember there being this weird silence after he said it. Not because I was shocked, because I realized he genuinely believed that was an acceptable answer. Like my property was just the easiest solution available. I looked out the kitchen window while he was talking. Big dirty snowbank crushing against my fence. Coffee cup sticking halfway out the side. Gray slush dripping slowly into my yard. And something in my brain shifted, because right then, it stopped being about snow. It became about somebody deciding my space mattered less than theirs. Dennis kept talking, probably trying to smooth things over, but honestly, I barely heard him anymore. I just kept staring at that fence line, thinking, something about this doesn't feel right. That night, I pulled out the original closing documents from when I bought the house, and that was the moment the whole story changed. I unfolded the old survey map from the file like it was some secret treasure, the kind you never expect to find, but hope exists. My heart sank a little when I traced the lines with my finger. The fence behind my garage wasn't where I thought it was, not even close. It sat several feet inside my property, like a polite suggestion, not a boundary. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept picturing every snowstorm, every coffee cup, every crushed corner of grass, and wondering how many months I'd silently tolerated someone using what was mine. The next morning, I called a licensed surveyor, explained the situation, and watched the stakes go into the frozen ground like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence that had been left unfinished for too long. $900 later, the truth was clear. The real property line ran 5 feet beyond my fence, cutting straight across part of the Freshway lot, not just a corner, the whole stretch. 8 parking spaces, a cart return, the edge of their delivery lane, all sitting on my land. The piles of snow hadn't been mere accidents, they were encroachments. And suddenly, all the frustration, the subtle rage, the feeling that I'd been ignored, it transformed into clarity. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I had leverage. I took photos, emailed the corporate office, attached the survey, gave them 30 days to fix it, expecting maybe a polite brush-off. I had a feeling, though, that the next time I walked into my yard after a snowstorm, things would be very different. Their legal team responded, predictably, in that calm, measured tone meant to make you doubt yourself, claiming the layout had existed for more than 10 years, implying that was enough to make it legal. I read the email to Sarah, my lawyer, who has this uncanny ability to make bureaucracy sound like poetry and its cruelty. She shook her head and said, "That doesn't matter. Not if there was ever permission before." Permission! I remembered something from the files, some old papers tucked behind the closing binder. The previous owner had signed a temporary access note years ago during a repaving project. It wasn't permission forever. It was a one-time courtesy, and that was all it took. That note changed everything. Suddenly, the snow piles, the leaning fence, the coffee cups, they weren't nuisances anymore. They were proof, evidence, and there was something deeply satisfying about that realization. This quiet, simmering power in knowing you're right, and you can enforce it without yelling, without dramatics, just methodically, precisely. They tried to buy the strip. The first number they offered, pathetically low. I declined. They came back slightly higher, still insulting. In the meantime, the snow continued to do its damage. Salt burned across my lawn, bare patches, the slow death of grass I had carefully nurtured for years. I watched it happen, feeling a mix of irritation, resolve, and a strange sense of inevitability. Enough was enough. I called a contractor, a no-nonsense guy named Mike who loved measuring things more than breathing. Together, we moved the fence, exactly on the survey markers, exactly where it belonged. Overnight, my yard grew wider, and their lot shrank. Parking spaces disappeared. The cart return now sat awkwardly outside their boundary. Delivery trucks had to angle differently. My phone rang that same afternoon. Dennis, his voice tense, hesitant. Deliveries are complaining, he said. I reminded him who paid the plow company, and there was silence. A long, heavy pause that felt like years compressed into one moment. It was a little vindictive, I'll admit, but not cruel. Just quiet justice. 2 days later, the regional manager called. Different tone. Calm, professional, respectful. She listened, offered to fix the lawn, rebuild the fence at their cost, and pay for a permanent easement. Negotiations took a week, a strange mix of poker-faced patience and relief. And we settled on $45,000 for a 12-year easement, complete with soil treatment, proper barriers to keep snow off my yard, and restored grass. I signed the papers while feeling this odd mixture of triumph and exhaustion, knowing the battle was over. Yet the lesson lingered. Small details, patience, and precise action can completely shift the power dynamic, even against a big corporation that assumes you'll just let things slide. But the whole time, I couldn't shake the thought of how easy it would have been to give up. How many people silently surrender when they're brushed aside, when the inconvenience isn't loud enough to demand attention. And I felt fortunate that I didn't, because the tiny details, an old survey, a stubborn streak, and a little patience changed everything. And in a way, walking through that freshly restored yard, watching the snow barriers do their job, I realized it wasn't just about money or property. It was about respect, boundaries, and knowing when to act instead of wait. And for the first time in months, I smiled without resentment, because the lesson was mine, the victory quiet, and completely deserved. By the time spring finally showed up, the whole place looked different. Not dramatically different from the street maybe, but to me, it felt like I was living on a completely different piece of land. The new fence stood 5 feet farther back, exactly where the survey markers said it belonged. Straight as an arrow, reinforced with steel posts this time. And behind it, Freshway's parking lot looked cramped. You could tell they were still trying to adapt to the change. Delivery trucks had to swing wider now. Employees kept moving the shopping cart return around like they were trying to solve a puzzle nobody warned them about. Customers occasionally parked halfway over the line because for 10 years everybody had assumed that strip belonged to the store. It didn't, and every single person there knew it now. The funny thing is, after all that tension, after months of calls, legal notices, contractors, arguments, and passive-aggressive corporate emails, the actual ending was weirdly quiet. No screaming match. No dramatic courtroom scene, no big public apology, just signatures on paper and people suddenly acting respectful once the consequences became expensive enough. That part stayed with me, because I kept thinking about what Walter said that winter standing out there in his old flannel jacket while we stared at those dirty snow piles. Corporate people don't care unless it costs some money. Damn if he wasn't right. A week after we finalized the easement deal, crews came out and repaired everything. They dug up the dead sections of grass behind my garage, treated the soil for salt damage, reseeded the lawn, even installed these black steel snow barriers near the edge of their lot so the plows physically couldn't push snow toward my property anymore. Watching them work was surreal. Same company that brushed me off for months was suddenly measuring every inch like a sacred ritual. Funny how fast professionalism appears once lawyers get involved. Dennis avoided me for a while after that. I'd still see him sometimes if I stopped in for coffee or milk. He'd give me this awkward little nod like we both survived something embarrassing together. Honestly, I never hated the guy. Looking back, I think he was stuck in that middle management trap where corporate squeezes you from above while customers scream from below. But at the same time, he made a choice. He could have handled it after the first phone call, could have sent the plow company somewhere else, could have walked outside and looked at the fence himself. Instead, he told me snow had to go somewhere. Turns out, so did accountability. And I'll admit something that probably makes me sound petty. The first time I saw that half-empty row of parking spaces after the fence move, I felt good, really good. Not because I wanted the store to fail. I didn't. I actually shopped there. Still do. But there was something deeply satisfying about watching a giant business suddenly forced to adjust around one regular guy who finally stopped letting things slide. Most people don't push back. That's the truth. Most people get intimidated by paperwork, legal language, corporate attitudes, the whole "this is just how things are" mentality. And honestly, I get it. There were nights I almost dropped the whole thing myself. $900 for a survey felt ridiculous at first. Hiring a lawyer felt excessive. Moving a fence felt insane. But every time I looked out that kitchen window and saw dirty snow crushing my yard, I knew if I backed down, I'd spend the rest of my time there, quietly resenting it. And resentment has a way of rotting things from the inside. The crazy part is, the entire situation existed because of one old misunderstanding years before I even bought the house. The previous owner had allowed temporary access during a paving project, and somewhere along the line, temporary became permanent simply because nobody challenged it. That happens all the time in life, doesn't it? People cross a line once, then twice, then eventually everybody forgets there was ever a line at all, until somebody redraws it, literally. Now every winter when the snow comes down, I still hear the plows at 4 in the morning scraping across the Freshway lot, but the sound doesn't bother me anymore. I'll make coffee, stand near the back window, and watch the snow pile up neatly behind their new barriers instead of against my fence. Sometimes I catch myself smiling about the whole thing. Not because of the money, even though 45 grand certainly didn't hurt, but because for once in my life I didn't ignore something just to keep the peace. And honestly, I think that changed me more than the check did. These days, Walter likes to joke that I won a land war with a supermarket, which sounds ridiculous until you realize it's technically true. He still brings it up anytime neighbors complain about HOA rules or property disputes. Says I'd become some kind of local legend for middle-aged homeowners with boundary issues. My daughter thinks the whole story is hilarious. She told her friends I bullied a grocery store with paperwork. My ex-wife said the entire situation was the most me thing she'd ever heard, which, honestly, wasn't even an insult. But every once in a while, I wonder what would have happened if I never opened that folder that night. If I just accepted the damage, accepted the excuse, accepted the idea that my space mattered less because fighting back felt inconvenient. Would they still be pushing snow into my yard right now? Probably. And that's the part I can't stop thinking about. Because depending on who you ask, I'm either the stubborn homeowner who stood up for himself, or the petty guy who caused a massive headache over a few piles of snow. Maybe both are true. So now I'm curious what you think. If you were in my position, would you have fought back the same way? Or would you have let it go? And once I discovered those parking spaces were technically on my property, was moving the fence justified? Or did I take it too far? Let me know in the comments because trust me, people in my town are still arguing about it. And if you enjoy real stories like this, where small problems turn into full-blown neighborhood wars, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Because sometimes the messiest conflicts start with something as simple as snow.